Well, the purpose of my appearing before you here tonight is to tell you about a near-fatal crash which I survived back in June of 1961. And if you don't care about survival, you got a chance to get a little sleep after a hard day. But if you do care about survival, I'll give you a few clues as to how I managed to outwit the Grim Reaper and what really should have been a fatal crash. I was coming back from Colorado Springs, deadheading in the back of a T-33, a tandem jet military trainer. Landed at St. Louis at Scott Air Force Base about halfway home to refuel, and it was hot as hell, and I took my jacket off. And that was my first mistake. Of course, flying up there around those Rockies, even in the hot summertime, if you had to crash land like the famous flight surgeon Dr. Randy Lovelace, flying in a short sleeve shirt from Albuquerque up to Colorado Springs, crash landed at night and survived the crash, but died from exposure for lack of a jacket. So I always have a jacket on or with me anytime I'm flying in any kind of an airliner, including any kind of an airliner or any kind of an airplane. And but taking that jacket off also denied me the additional insulation, which would have minimized the injuries that I got later in the crash. We went out for takeoff, and I used the checklist, but I always thought I knew my procedure so well I didn't need a checklist, but in these complicated machines and even the simple machines that you're flying and operating today, if you don't use a checklist and something distracts you, you start omitting items, and that's where you start getting in trouble. And right on the top of the back of the checklist, it says, before takeoff, seat belt and shoulder harness fastened tight. Now, anytime I get in any kind of a moving vehicle, first thing I do is shut that door and fasten that seat belt. If I get in a car doesn't have a seat belt in it, I sit in the back seat here behind the driver. He says, what are you sitting back there for? I say, because if you hit something, I want you to go through that windshield first, make a good big hole, so that when I go through, I won't get cut. But you have to fasten that thing every time you get in that machine. But you have to fasten that thing snug. And when you fasten that seat belt in the automobile or the airplane, fasten it and then go through the reverse process and touch the button because all the buckles and stuff are different, and then touch the door handle because they're all different. And if you have a jettison handle, I touch that because, you know, if you should happen to wind up upside down in a weak way, sometimes the driver wouldn't help you out too much. So you want to have that thing snug. I even fasten my belt going into the garage. Now, there's no way that thing can do me any good going backwards in that garage, but if it's a conscious thought process where I say I'm going to fasten the seat belt going out on the interstate, but I'm not going to fasten it just going over to the supermarket, then when I'm late for work, coffee's cold, and I'm fighting with my wife, and, you know, I'm spring-loaded in the accident position, I'm going to forget it. But if I do it every time, shut the door, fasten the seat belt, then if I'm under stress and forget it even momentarily, why, I have an automatic memory cue. I've broken my standard procedure, and I want to keep that thing snug, because if you don't have that harness snug in the airplane or the automobile and your body develops any momentum within the harness, it actually doubles the stresses and everything comes unglued. And then, of course, flying with that military helmet, make sure your chin strap and nape strap fits you here and here, because if it doesn't, you know, that thing's going to rotate right off your head. But then have that visor down, like if you're flying military or ag or motorcycle or whatever, to protect yourself against flying fragments, bird strikes, or gravel in the motorcycle or whatever. Because if you've ever been blind like I have for 4 or 5 days, it's a pretty darn terrifying experience. So you want to protect those eyes. And then as a little additional precaution, although it's not on the checklist, I always made sure I could get my feet up like this on the panel, not punching out any glass, and I could brace myself just in case we ran off the end of that runway. And I've done that before every takeoff, maybe 100 takeoffs in the back of that airplane. And people say, well, did you think you were going to crash? Of course I didn't think I was going to crash, or I never got in the bloody thing. You know, that's ridiculous. But I'd rather be prepared for the worst and pleasantly surprised when I don't crash than the other way around. And I feel that way about driving out there on that interstate and amongst all those people that are out to exterminate me. You know, you want to be prepared for the worst at all times. But we checked each other back and forth on the checklist, got off the ground, a normal takeoff run with a full load of fuel at night, real hot, got the gear up, got the flaps up. By the time we got about 150 feet, the engine quit. No snap, no crackle, no pop, no nothing. And right away we elected not to eject because we were right at 150 feet, which is the minimum altitude for the ejection in that non-rocket seat. And the Air Force has a tendency to raise the minimums 50 feet with the last unsuccessful ejection. And we weren't about to volunteer to make any posthumous TO revisions, so I don't advocate riding them in. You know, if that engine quits over the side, give it back to the taxpayer. If you're going to err on ejection, err on the early side. But had we punched out, we never would have made it because we took 35 feet out of a 110-foot tree right off the end of the runway. And while the pilot was trying to get an air start up front, I still had time to lower my seat down as far as it would go so my head wouldn't be up against that canopy in case we started cartwheel, and yank my seat belt, shoulder harness tight as it'd go, check chin strap, visor down, feet up on the panel like this, hands up like this. Then I did something real stupid. I held my head back like that. I think I was thinking about ejecting, or more likely the position that you go in when you're going to impact in an automobile or airplane. You say, I can't look, and that's the worst position you can have your head in. Gets you maximum momentum, best chance of breaking your neck. What I should have done was I should have been doubled up sort of in the embryo position. You may not remember what the embryo position is. You could maybe ask some second lieutenant, you know, he could tell you. It's pretty small, because the last thing I remember, I was looking at the airspeed, it says 125 knots. I heard the trees hit the bottom of the airplane, and I got a red out as my head snapped forward. And then my helmet just rotated off of my head because I hadn't adjusted the nape strap properly back here, and it went completely out of the aircraft, the canopy bubble having fragmented out of the frame on impact. And then as you get in any aircraft crash or front-end collision in a car, the harness stretches forward like that, and then it slings you back, and that thing, I hit my head back here on a soft, squishy cushion behind which there's a metal plate, and that thing knocked me out. Now, you want to take a look around the aircraft that you're flying, make sure that the latest technological breakthrough isn't set up like a meat skewer for you to hang your head on. You get ricocheting around in there. If there's any sharp corners, metallic boxes or anything, you can pad that up with styrofoam out of an old ice chest and a little masking tape, and you can hit your hand on that or hit your head on that, and it's not going to knock you out, which is basically what they've done to modify this headrest so that wouldn't happen again. As I started to come to, I had a feeling of well-being, like if you've ever been conned and taken off your mask in the pressure chamber at the equivalent of 30,000 feet to show you really don't need oxygen, and you feel high and you pass out on the floor. How many people have been suckered into doing that? I thought they only did it to the generals, but anyhow, or if you're anesthetized in a hospital, you begin to feel high just before you go under. So that to me was a warning that I was near unconsciousness and really maybe near death. So right away I was motivated to do something, because when I'd been with General Patton in the 2nd Armored Division, he always said anytime you're in a panic situation, don't freeze with terror. Do something. Can't think of anything else to do, throw a fit, but don't just sit there. And the first thing I did was something that I'd learned from the pilot, how to get out of that airplane, always the same way. And the first thing before you move in there is you safety these seat pins in here, because if you don't, you inadvertently hook those triggers, that sends you and your seat 65 feet in the air, which is dandy for getting out of the airplane at altitude, but on the ground, the return trip is somewhat fatal. So I'm prodding for those pins, and then I realize I'm sitting on a ruptured fuel tank. Fire is coming out all around me, and it looks just like sitting between two afterburners. My cotton flying suit is burning like a torch. My hair is crackling like a grass fire, and in spite of all that pain and chaos and confusion from that training over and over again, always go for those seat pins. Then my light takes over, and I realize while I'm clubbing around for these pins, which are hard enough to put in the daytime, let alone at night when you're on fire, that charge is going to click off and send me sailing to my doom anyhow. So I said, heck with that, but I'm going to be real careful not to hook those handles. Now, right away, I elected to take my parachute with me, because that's the fastest way and the way I've been trained to get out of the aircraft. And also, if your clothing's on fire, if you pop a chute, you can wrap up and smother the fire. if you see somebody with clothing on fire and they're running, tackling them and knocking them down, the worst thing you can do with clothing on fire is to run through that air just like fanning the fire. Tackle them, knock them down, wrap them up in a chute or a overcoat or beat the fire out somehow or other. But don't run. I went for my seat belt and I had my glove on, and if I hadn't had my glove on, I would have been unable to get out of that aircraft at all, unless I'd been fished out. Only 2% of the people get fished out of aircraft. 98%, 98% get out under their own power. So if I'd been in that lucky 2% and fished out without the glove on, I would have been an amputee here on this arm, or here on this arm here, and without the boots on, I would have been an amputee below both knees here, and that's a quadruple amputee, which is something I'm not much interested in becoming. The reason I had on the boots and gloves was because the late General Milliken, the commander of the D.C. Air Guard, had seen a couple of our fighter jocks packing in with bare arms on a canopy rail, no gloves. He says, "Bill, I don't usually chew out other people's troops, but I got to give these guys a word." And called them over and told them that he brought back the casualties of aircraft crashes and fires in the Battle of Britain and showed them the stumps of amputated hands and feet, not worse than anything I have, just because they hadn't been wearing the proper protective clothing. And I was so impressed by overhearing him correcting people that weren't even under his jurisdiction that I started wearing boots and gloves right then and there. So it's thanks to him that I'm alive today. And I know he got some kind of a kick out of that, because I've given this thing some 1,300 and some times, and lots of people have heard just what you're hearing here and now, and it's minimized their injuries and in many cases actually saved their lives. But suppose General Milliken had said, I don't want to shake up Spruance's troops, the heck with it. I wouldn't be here today. So if you see somebody doing something wrong at the place where you work or in your automobile or in your airplane, and you don't tell them to strap in or strap that gear in, and that becomes a missile and a little kid goes through the windshield, or somebody gets killed in the airplane because they're not strapped in, and you have that death on your conscience, that's the worst thing that could happen to you. And young people today are a lot smarter than we with the gray hair around the edges were at that age. And so if you tell them the reasons why, they'll go along with you. I had on an all-leather glove, and better than no glove at all, but where my hand was hanging in the fire there for 3 to 5 minutes, the leather shrunk on my hand and decreased the circulation and increased the conductivity of the heat. If I'd had on this Nomex back glove, then the shrinkage of the leather would have been counteracted by the stretch of the Nomex, and that's the reason we have the double surface glove. And as I showed this to the late Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General McConnell, and he said, "My God, it fits like a glove. You know, where the Air Force ever gets something like that?" And I said, "Well, it's a Navy glove," he said. That explains it. But it does fit like a glove, and you can toggle switches one at a time with this. It's not like those old stubby, gray, short-fingered, size 10 gloves we used to have that you could gang load about 6 inches of lick with those things on. But you have to resist the temptation to strip the glove off, like the B-47 co-pilot did to copy the clearance, and they aborted on takeoff. A liquid wall of burning fuel sloshed into the cockpit. They leaped blew the canopy, leaped over the side, rolled in the snow in their winter flying clothing, and neither of them had any burns at all, except the co-pilot looked down, his hand was the color of a baked potato. And he said, heck, he could have copied that clearance with an asbestos mitten on, you know, if he'd thought about it, but you reflex to pull that glove off. So you want to put that glove on and keep it on until you're away from that airplane and headed for the club. But this material in the back is a special kind of synthetic called Nomex. It's not like a normal synthetic, like this RAF pilot said, "What do you think my flying suit's made out of?" And I said, "Well, I think it looks and feels like a pure synthetic. What will it do when it burns?" "Well, we'll cut a little piece out of the pant cuff and see what happens." I lit it. Flames coming off it about this high. Liquid molten synthetic is burning and dropping down on the floor, and I dropped it down there and put my foot on it, let it cool, and it just went. Well, that stuff had fused into the sole of my shoe and fused into the floor. And that's what pure synthetic will do next to your hide. And doctors Any doctor will tell you burns the worst thing you've got to treat for openers, and you compound that with solidified synthetic, and you got a real problem. Talked to a guy that flipped a Cessna 172, stuffed the struts up through the wing tank, dumped raw fuel burning all over top, and had his synthetic trousers fused from the bottom of his shorts here to the top of his sock. Talked to people who were in that Tenerife crash that where the two jumbos ran together, where skirts are catching fire and synthetic, just like these ones that are being advertised or they're talking about on TV that are very inflammable, just burn like crazy. So, but this Nomex has special inherent properties in the thread that will not support combustion and will not fuse at survivable temperatures. And you can buy them. I've got the address if you want it, or you can buy them at any flying magazine or driver's magazine. It's really great stuff. Well, I undid my seat belt, and I was real careful not to hook those handles, and I looked in the front cockpit, and I could see the pilot had his head down in under the panel, and he had suffered a 90-degree back break right through here on impact, which was fatal, probably because he was still flying that airplane like you'd be doing. But he might have been able to do what this Australian did. He heard this pitch, engine quit too low to eject, cinched up his harness, chin strap, visor down, feet high on the rudder pedals, chin tucked in like that, one hand up on the panel. And at the last minute, he kept flying that airplane above stall speed. Now, you know, you don't stall them, and you only make low, slow turns to avoid buildings or something's going to get you for sure. And try and land it right straight ahead. And at the last minute, hand down like that, hands up like that, he walked away from under. It was absolutely totaled, that I'll show you a picture of here directly. Just the same thing if you're driving down that highway and you're going to have one of those 5-car pileups on this expressway, you know, and the cars are spinning around and the tires are smoking and the wheel covers are coming off and the fenders are bending, the glass is flying and everything. You want to tuck your chin in, feet 1 foot high on the brake, the other on the firewall, keep looking for a hole like this, and at the last minute, head all the way down like that. Now, if you don't have a shoulder harness on, don't go back like this and say, geez, I can't look, because your upper torso, if it weighs about 100 pounds, and you hit with a 20G impact, which is easily survivable, that's 20 times 100, that's 2,000 pounds, that's a ton, and you cannot hold a ton off that column. And when your muscles fail, they fail all at once. You stick that steering column in your heart and the horn ring in your teeth and your forehead in the windshield. So if you don't have a harness on, then get up on the steering column like that and keep looking for a hole, and at the last minute down like that. Try and think of it not, geez, I can't look, but, you know, let us pray. Our Father, start working on it, because what you're trying to do is avoid the secondary collision. That is, I can hit this chair from back here, and I'll break my hand every time. But if I pre-position my hand up against that, and then I can impact against that, and it's not going to hurt at all, and I can drive the chair clear across the stage. So where are your feet going to be? They're going to swing forward like this. So you want to have them up on the brake and the firewall, or high on the pedals, or if you're in an airliner, you have them on the cross strut here, or on your carry-on luggage, but not like this with no luggage under there, and swing through and break your ankles on this, or your shin bones on that crossbar, which is what happened in one accident. And if you're in the back seat of an automobile or in an airline seat, down like this, and if you can't reach anything, double up like that. Now, you don't want to lean forward in that spring-loaded shoulder harness. You stay back in there so that your head is forward like that, so it won't whiplash over the harness. There's 3 different kinds of shoulder harnesses. There's a fixed kind, give it a yank, and there's a inertia kind, which you give a yank and that thing will lock at 2 G's, and then the more modern ones, you tap the brake and that thing will look in the mirror and that thing will pull it. When you pull it, that'll tap that brake. At 0.6 of a G, that thing will lock right away. And it really works, because a car came out of the dark and hit me one night, and the glass is snowing in the back and the whole frame is doubled in like that. And the seat buckled like this and kicked me up towards the roof, and I never touched that roof, and the car was totaled. And yet, then the trooper, of course, came over, and I walked right up to him. He said, "Have you been drinking?" And I said, hell no, because I was going to the party and not from the party. But you want to watch those mothers are mad out there, you know, and if I'd be behind a different kind of a bar, you know, if I'd been coming from the party. You want to do designated driver is the only way to go. But girls don't like the way that shoulder harness irritates them because, in case you fellows hadn't noticed, they're built different from fellows, and they tend to put the strap down under their arm like that. Now give the orthopedic surgeon a new twist, you know, that really fascinating. But you want to have that, pull that little comfort clip down or pull that little clicker down so there's just room enough for you to get your hand in there, for her to get her hand in there. And then she'll move about this far forward, and that'll stop her from sticking her face in that glass and getting cut up and slashed so she looks like she doesn't need a mask when she goes to the next Halloween party. But you may say you don't need a shoulder harness and seatbelt going through a school zone where you're only going to be going 15 miles an hour. All of a sudden you look out over there and there's a good-looking girl and you've got a lock on and you're looking at her and a little kid runs in front of the car in front of you and that car stops and your car stops. You're looking at the girl, but you're still going 15 miles an hour. Do you think you can run 15 miles an hour? Can you? Can you? Can you? Come on. One of you guys can run 15 miles an hour. The husband is coming through the kitchen with a butcher knife. That's a 4-minute mile. You may be able to sustain that, but you could peek out through the kitchen anyhow. So you back off and run just as hard as you can for that wall there with your head down, just as hard as you can go, and you may peek out at 15 miles an hour. And while you're looking at that girl, you're going to go 15 miles an hour right through that windshield, and that's going to smart a little, I'll guarantee you. But the average impact is not 15, it's 35. About 2.5 times the speed of what you run into that wall with no harness on. And in the airplane, geez, I hit it 125, and the speed you hit at, you can never tell what it's going to be. So you want to be restrained and braced in the direction of impact and everything have it going for you. As I stood up and looked over the side of the airplane, I could see we were in a creek and there's fire all over the water. And I turned and caught blind suit still burning and everything. And I sat on the side of the airplane, got a first-degree burn on my tail, and I did a non-point winning dive where the fire was carried off that way and then went to the bottom, hit my head on a log. And I know it says in all the books your life's supposed to be passing before you in one of these emergencies. But I was so mad, hit my head on that log that the 4-letter words were bubbling up and reigniting the fuel. And I discovered right then with my chute boots and all that gear on, I went to the bottom like a stone. And unless you have adequate religious connections to walk on top of the water, which even the generals don't have, although some won't admit it, next best thing to do is walk on the bottom, walk uphill so you can kick off the surface, kick off the bottom, shoot to the surface, do a butterfly breaststroke, knock that fire and stuff off of there, because if you inhale fire, smoke, hot gases, or even raw fuel, it'll give your lungs the fatal treatment. So I got up on the bank and the crash crew came to pick me up about 17 minutes after impact, although it was only 1.5 miles off the end of the runway. And 8% of the crashes occur within 2 miles of the approach or over on end of that runway. So you take a look at the fields you're flying off of and see if you can make a little bulldozer road or figure out some way you can get access to that 2 miles off either end. Or if you got some helicopters with Army Guard guys, with a little minimum fire suppression gear, it's come in real handy, because 17 minutes is a long time to sit out there, I'll guarantee you. They started to pick me up, and the nylon straps in my chute had fused into my shoulder where the cotton had burned out from underneath it. And I said, "Get me out of this parachute." Nobody had to undo that leg buckle, which I think is invented by the Chinese puzzle manufacturers. And I couldn't explain to them in a state of shock how to undo that, so I said, "Cut me out of it." And nobody had a knife. Of course, I had a knife in the leg pocket of my flying suit, and I carry a knife with me every place I go, because you can never tell when you're going to have an emergency, when you're going to need a knife. Like if they were to merge the Air National Guard into the Air Force Reserve. Carry to that one. Not that I have anything against the Air Force Reserve, because somebody's got to be number 2 so the guard can be number 1. And that's a completely biased opinion, and I'm sticking to it unless there's a 2-star reservist here. But anyhow, I always carry a knife with me. I carry a lighter, and I carry a flashlight. You never tell when all the lights are going to go off in here. What are we going to do? Anybody got a flashlight beside me? I hope so. Hey, a few, maybe. So you want to have a light with you. And I always carry a whistle on my key ring. And you also can signal if you're down someplace in that airplane. As a lifeguard told me last night, you cup your hands and blow that whistle, and you can hear that thing for miles. So it's a lot better than shouting when you're trying to get somebody's attention when you need help. They put me in the ambulance about that time I heard this thing go kaboom, and sure enough, this 190-pound seat had cooked off the launch charge and sent itself up into the trees. And I said, if anybody's got any connections with the front office, say a short prayer that seat doesn't come through the roof of this ambulance and kill us all. After the first 4 days, they air-evac'd me down to San Antonio, and it was nice to get back in the air again. And there I had the fabulous care of the medicine men that I think could put Humpty Dumpty back together again. One of the first problems I had was I had a wraparound burn on my arm. Anytime you have third-degree wraparound burn on an extremity, they just have to amputate it. And they said they'd had a guy had a wraparound burn on his finger. Instead of cutting it off, they put them pouch in the abdomen, and the old fed the finger and everything until the old supply restored itself. And they pulled it out, wrapped the skin graft around it. The guy's got a pretty good working finger. They said, how would you like to try that with your arm? And I said, gee, I don't know. You guys ever done this before? And they said, no. And I said, well, that's not much of a testimonial. What else do you have in mind? They said, well, we could cut your arm off. And I said, well, that's the easiest decision of my career. You know, what have I got to lose? And give it a go. So they put my hand in a pouch here in my abdomen. That fed the hand and everything until the old supply restored itself. And it was just like keeping your hand in your pocket, but a month is a long time to keep your hand in your pocket. And then they pulled it out and wrapped the skin graft around it, and they took skin from me all over. In fact, there's one expression I never use anymore, is it's no skin off my... I can't hold a highball glass in this hand, but I can hold one in this hand. And I think that's a chlorine flip. But I can hold a champagne glass in this hand, so I can have to make some adjustments. But I can shoot ducks and important things in life, and I can fish. I caught a 140-pound tarpon, a 6'6" fish, by myself, no captain, no mate, witnesses. Honest face like mine, my God. I really did catch it, but that was 12 years after the accident. So you do get better every day. But some things I can't handle paperwork. You know, it's called a controllable disability, and I can freeze up. I have some pictures here which I stole out of the accident file to show you what you can get away with making the minimum of mistakes, and also to show what the medical men can do to put you back together again. And also some pictures of some other people who've heard just what you've heard here so far and how it's helped save their lives. Can we have the lights down, please? And the first slide is, this is a scene of the crash, and you can see landed the airplane just like it says in the book. No low, slow turns. If he'd gone for this sucker field over here on the right, we'd have cartwheeled and had it for sure. But he landed it right straight ahead, right? Took 35 feet out of a 110-foot tree right here, 800-foot swath through the woods, landing in this creek here in this circle, but right on the runway heading, runway 13. And here's the tail up here, the engine here. This is looking up the rear of the fuselage, wings lying in the water, something in excess of 15, maybe 20 G's of impact. And I had burn injuries, and I had that whack in the head from forgetting to get my helmet properly fitted, and also not holding my head forward and hitting my head on that darn headrest. But otherwise, I had no broken bones, no sprains, no nothing from hitting at 125 knots. And this is the engine, which they immediately took apart and determined the cause of the failure, the fatigue brake and the linkage in the fuel controller system. Had we had the gang start modification, we'd have had no problem. We had the paperwork on it. We got the parts 2 weeks after the accident. So if that had been expedited by 2 weeks, cutting through that higher headquarters feedback, like the exigencies of the situation preclude the economical feasible modification, which is bureaucratese where I don't understand it, I don't want to make a decision, and I'm waiting for retirement. 2 weeks expediting that, and the pilot's 5 kids would still have a father. So when you're fooling with safety items, you're in a race against time and something that's really a matter of life and death. And as Murphy's Law says, if the accident can happen, it'll happen. This is the engine up here on the bank having broken off from behind me sitting here, and the remnants of Geller Air Guard painted on the side of your airplane. I'm a great believer in painting the name of your outfit on the side of your aircraft vehicle. It's good for advertising and morale, public relations, recruiting, all that sort of thing. But when you have an accident, somebody always gets a picture of it, and you get famous for having crashes. So my advice to you is first get the survivors out of there, then get out with a paint remover and take your name off of there. And paint on there U.S. Navy or no, not that, Rocky Air Force or North Korea or something like that. Almost got thrown off a carrier for that one. Quite a bit of fire damage there due to the roughness of the terrain. They couldn't get in with anything except hand-carried fire extinguishers. Had we had a chopper with a bottle, we'd have had no sweat. Talking to this rescue guy over in Thailand, I said, what can I tell people around airplanes will make your job easier in saving their lives? And he said, the thing that bugs us most in the rescue business is sitting there in the firehouse, bored to death, and all of a sudden you look up and there's a burning airplane out in the middle of the runway, and it takes 3 to 5 minutes to get out there where you can even begin to start putting the fire out. Whereas if you declared an emergency, could have had the fire truck sprung out down the runway and maybe get the fire out before it even gets lit. And if you declare an emergency, don't feel it's have to crash. That isn't necessary. And, when I went over to the side of that airplane, I had a perfect mental picture of this page out of this World War II training manual, which I hadn't looked at for at least 15 years. And I can't remember a word on there now, but I can remember that picture. And if I hadn't remembered that and I'd taken a gulp of that fire, smoke, or hot gases, I'd have had it for sure. So that picture there saved my life. So you want to look at every horror publication, every accident report that you can get your hands on, and one page might save your life like that saved mine. As it was, I did inhale some fire while I was sitting in that, and smoke while I was sitting in that thing for 3 to 5 minutes, and the anesthesiologist said in that some of those 36 operations were 5 hours long, and he said if I'd been a heavy smoker, the additional damage there to my lungs, I never would have survived. So smoking for the aviator is really bad news. When you're taking in that carbon monoxide or the tar or any of that stuff, it's reducing your oxygen intake, and whatever you do better if you're taking in more oxygen. So if you think, and the oxygen actually deprives, the carbon monoxide actually deprives the brain of oxygen. The nicotine actually constricts the blood vessels in the brain. And I used to smoke 2 packs a day, and I know what that high feeling is, but that's a stupefying feeling, and it reduces your performance. If you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and you're at sea level, then you're actually at 5,000 feet as far as oxygen intake goes. 2 packs a day and you're up to 8,000 feet a day, 8,000 feet altitude. And the smoke is 3 times as suffocating as the Environmental Protection Agency's standards for air pollution. In the airliner, before they banned smoking, it was 50 times the EPA standard. And when you're smoking in a house and the parents are smoking and little crumb crunchers are crawling around there inhaling that secondhand air, that's not only affecting their lungs and their ability to throw off colds, but they're finding now that it actually retards their brain development, which is really scary. And it'll get you ultimately. My late wife had never been in the hospital except to have kids for 32 years, didn't feel very well one year, took her to 3 major medical centers, couldn't find a thing wrong with her. The next year, first x-ray, she had terminal inoperable squamous cell lung cancer. So it went from undetectable, when we went back and looked at the old x-rays, to in less than a year, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, those cells multiply, and to see her disintegrate without anti-radiation treatment and the chemotherapy and all the rest of it. And 14 months later, after all her hair had come out, this healthy tennis-playing girl couldn't get her breath and died. So when you're talking to your doctor and he says that the cancer-producing substances destroy the mouth, throat, and lungs, and it also should say heart because 90% of the heart problems are smoking-induced. He says quit smoking even if he's got a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth. Quit smoking. But if he says quit drinking, why, get a fresh doctor. But watch those mad mothers and have a designated driver. That's the only way to go. This is what I looked like 3 weeks after the accident. Little grafting on this shoulder, rebuilt my nose. Otherwise, that stuff generally healed itself. And that's the hardest thing for a patient and for the next of kin to realize is the amazing ability of the human body to recover if you cooperate with the doctors. And this is where my arm was to the bone, and that's a heck of a looking picture too. But this fellow here had seen that picture, and although this was back in the cotton flying suit days, he remembers the reason I was burned like that because I didn't have a jacket on. So he had on a hot jacket, and he ran off the end of the runway, sheared the nose gear, leaped over the side, hadn't practiced getting out of the airplane, chute hit him in the back of the legs, fell in the fire, burned the sleeves almost completely out of the jacket, but the flight surgeon said if he hadn't had that jacket on, he would have been a double arm amputee. Now, you put your arms behind you tomorrow morning and see how far you get with no arms, and I submit that that's a far greater tragedy than just the temporary shock of looking at that picture. And this fellow with the same kind of sleeve burns had no gloves on, fingers got permanent constrictions in and never fly again, whereas this fellow with the same kind of sleeve burns has gloves on, back flying again, no problem at all. This fellow didn't know how to undo the fittings, hadn't practiced getting out of the F-111, and you can see stripping off the right glove, distal joints amputated, scar tissue and all that, whereas the gloved hand is in perfect shape. This fellow has gloves on, be okay in a mild fire, but in a bad fire with those bare arms, he just won't have them hooked up to anything. So that isn't going to do much good. I always fly with long cotton sleeves, long shirt, long sleeves with a maximum amount of cotton in the shirts, minimum synthetic that I can find. And in that airliner, I don't let them put my coat in that upper rack. I always have that coat either on or have it in my lap so that I can have that protection in case I need it. Lost 2 guys' hands in the Air Force from not having the overlap of the gauntlet and the glove. Here's a Daytona stock car racer, hit the sidewall, had everything going for him except he forgot his gloves, and you could see what it did to his hands. We get complacent around when not having had it a long time, and like you go over here to play the wheel and in Atlantic City, and your number doesn't come up for a long while, and you start doubling up. But we go a long time without an accident, and we say, well, it's not going to happen. But it will. And these people got complacent, taxied this airplane out into the path of a bomb-loaded fighter on takeoff roll. Everybody got killed up front. Loadmaster back here held his breath, got the door open, and he was the sole survivor in the transport. The 2 guys in the Marine fighter wound up upside down, hanging in this wreckage, and they attributed their survival, among other things, to the fact that they had the Nomex gear on. And here's a so-called uncomfortable Nomex on the left in another accident, and this is the so-called comfortable cotton. Well, he was pretty uncomfortable with those arm and leg burns, as you can see. Don't get around fires like this. All it takes is a secondary explosion like a can of foam, shaving foam, or a bug bomb or anything, and that raw fuel to go off and redistribute that raw burning fuel all over the bare skin areas of all these people, except a guy that's properly clad and a professional firefighter. So if there's some survivors in there, you can take a chance. But if there are no survivors, just leave it alone. Let the firemen take care of it. The bacteria that you get into your wounds, whether you're in any kind of an accident, particularly a fire, is what's on your clothing or on your skin at the time that you're hurt. I'd taken a shower that morning, put on a clean undershirt, reasonably clean flying suit, and if I hadn't, the doctors say the additional bacteria would have got me for sure. This guy has a dangling chin strap, visor up. He has the visor up, and he's got the sleeves cut off, so he can't roll them down even in an emergency. No gloves and a synthetic scar that he diffused into his hide, doing everything wrong. Fly with your collar up if you have an option. as the late Bill Jones, the Medal of Honor winner, said, take my picture and show it to the aviators and say, if I only had my collar up, I wouldn't have had that neck burn there from the additional protection. And these four guys in the same crash, this one lost his helmet on initial impact and was killed. Very bad fitting helmet. This one, fair fitting helmet, lost it on secondary impact, went to hospital. These two guys on the end in the same crash retained their helmets throughout and had absolutely no head injuries at all. So when you're riding that motorcycle, wear a helmet and wear some leather, wear some gloves, and remember it's 14 times as dangerous as going on four wheels. This fellow decelerating on a sled has concentric rings around his neck, show the structure of the vertebra. So if the neck is up like this, it's going to whiplash forward. Best chance of breaking it. But if it's forward already over that harness, it's just going to stretch out, and that's the minimum chance of breaking your neck. If you're hit from behind, beware of this tailgater. This girl down the 7 Mile Bridge said she was stopped and couldn't go anywhere. She looked in the mirror, saw this guy was going to hit her. She's in a big neck brace and everything. Said there was nothing I could do. The heck there wasn't. All you have to do, if you're stopped on a high-speed highway and you're driving, look in the mirror, you see somebody's going to hit you, slide down and put your hands and feet out like that and slide down in that seat, because this car is about to accelerate now, when you get hit, and it's going to be going from 0 up to about 15 or 20 anyhow, going that way. So you've got to have that adjustable headrest. It's got to be up where it's going to support the back of your neck, not down here like a chopping block in that front seat. And if you're in the back seat, and I'm riding on a high-speed highway, and you see you're going to have one of those big pileups like we do here out on the Jersey Turnpike, I don't look around to see what's coming, get a new twist in my neck. I just instinctively slide down. I don't want my head spring-loaded to go out through that back window. I slide down till my head and neck are flat against that back seat, and you can take a hellacious wallop like that. And this is, you want to start these little kids off facing, they don't care whether they're going frontwards or backwards, but they're just as happy going either way. But a guy told me just the other day, if you've got an airbag now and a child in the front seat, don't face him aft, put him in the back seat, because if that airbag inflates, that'll knock the kid back over that way, which I never thought of. So if you airbag-equipped cars, don't put that kid where the thing will inflate on him. If you just have one of those automatic shoulder harnesses and you don't have your lap belt on, you're in trouble too. So you have to have all three, airbag, lap belt, and shoulder harness. Now, the airbag really works. This guy fell asleep going 65 miles an hour right out here driving from Dover up to Wilmington, and he was out in front picking up his he fell asleep. Last thing he remembers, he was going 65. He's out in front picking up the papers out of his briefcase here, and the police went to dig the body out of here, and he said, no, don't dig him. It's me here. I'm okay. And he was back at work again the next day. Shook a little bit, but no sweat. The guy with the Volkswagen, just a lap belt, see where he would have gone, but with the shoulder harness, pulled him off. You may say, well, I don't want that harness on in case I go in water or catch fire. But the problem is, if you get knocked out and you're in water or you catch fire, you're going to drown or burn to death for sure. People say, well, if I'd had my belt on, I would have been killed. One chance out of 30, the belt will do you more harm than good. The other 29 times out of 30, it'll save your life. So you may bet 30 to 1 on a horse, but certainly not on your life. And these are general aviation cockpits superimposed on top of each other, and you see the legs swing forward, arms swing forward. You want to pull that upper torso with the shoulder harness all off of that, and the head forward so it won't whiplash over. Now, if you don't have a harness in an old automobile or an old airplane, you can get a 10 feet of webbing at any auto supply store, get some heavy cord, sew a loop in each end, and then tie it back here or thread it through the rear seat belt, put your front seat belt through those two loops, and there for a couple bucks, you've got a good functional shoulder harness. I'm always asked, why wouldn't you always pick up an aft seat? Well, an aft-facing seat, this forward-facing seat will tear out at 20 Gs at this point. The aft-facing seat will tear out at 12 Gs at this point. So if you're in a military airplane where the floor is stressed for 20 Gs across here, then that's fine. But if you're not, then that thing may tumble. I don't want to sit in an aft-facing seat unless I have a bulkhead behind me. That's the only time I'll sit in one. But if you put this fellow here heard this pitch over at Fort Bragg, and he had his feet up on the crossbar here, not down here where it'd break his shin bones. It took this position as the airliner ran off the end of the runway, and the guy sitting alongside of him sat bolt upright and said, what was all that noise? They never saw him again. But the fellow that went into this position here was one of the heroes who helped extricate people out of that wreckage. And when I'm riding in an airline, I always watch that line out there, riding in any kind of an airplane. If that line goes underneath or the runway lights go under that way or over that way, I know we're going off that runway, and right away I'll go into that bracing position. This fella was in the Pango crash when they hit the wind shear, and as it started to gyrate, he immediately went into that same position, and they hit and bounced into the jungle. And a lot of people thought on the first impact that was a landing, and they undid their belts and their bodies flying all over the place. But he stayed braced in and until the thing stopped and then started forward. And this is an unusual crash in that the fuel tank was ruptured here, and a gully forward here, the fire went forward. Normally the fire is aft. But he got a whiff of the phosgene and cyanide gases that come from the decomposition of the plastics in combustion. And he was an Olympic diving coach, could hold his breath an interminable length of time. And he opened this exit, ran off, jumped off the wing, and he was the only guy in the whole airplane out of 101 people that didn't have toxic deposits in his lungs. There were two other people sitting alongside of Dick, and he said that it's the first time they'd ever been in an airplane. They read all the instructions, and when they crashed, they did it, whereas 97 seasoned travelers went to their doom. But the main thing you have to do when that smoke starts is you've got to avoid that first gulp of smoke, then you're coughing, and then your eyes blink up with the smoke and you can't see. So if you have diver's goggles for about $5, or the smoke hood, or have a pillow over your nose, or a painter's mask, then you're not going to be inhaling that stuff and you're going to be able to move out. I'm always asked where to sit. Pilot, co-pilot got a worst seat in the house. They get paid for it, but then they're the first to arrive at the scene of the accident, they always say. They get killed first, then first class gets killed and you go coach and arrive alive. So sit in the back. But the best place, I think, to sit is in the over-wing exit row, if you're exit row qualified, and then you can go forward or aft or right or left. You got 4 choices, and the fire is generally to the rear. So as in this case, the pilot went out over the nose, got minimum burns, all the fire was aft. But don't jump off a high wing or a sill because you want to hang by your hands. If you break your leg jumping, you can't get away from the thing. You want to have some functional shoes because when you get down at the bottom, like this DC-9 crash back in the old days, they took all the shoes off the people, and after they crashed, ran out of fuel, they're running around in these jagged embers in here and jagged metal and splinters and everything else, got all kinds of foot injuries. And when you realize that those crashes were, as I told you, they occurred 2 miles off the approach or overrun into that runway, you go out there in your bare feet and try and walk around without functional shoes, you're in real trouble. Or suppose it happens in Phoenix and you're or Las Vegas and you're on the ramp there right in the airport, and all of a sudden you have to go out that slide in your bare feet, and the temperature is 135 degrees on that car, and there's not a nylon that's fusing into your feet. You've got all kinds of problems. And if it's wintertime, surely you want to have a jacket. Even in going to warm Florida, you want to have a jacket. You want to know where that life jacket is all the time. They don't brief for using life jackets, unless you're 50 miles offshore. Well, tell me how many people have swum 50 miles lately? Nobody I know of. And that cushion I don't swim very well with that cushion. I reach under there, if there's a life jacket under there, I'm going to use that. instead of the cushion, whether they briefed me on it or not. These two guys in this airplane here with the overrun still the overrun, the tail of the airplane still on the overrun, and they drowned here because they hadn't been briefed on how to use the life jacket. And I want a life jacket anytime I'm swimming in water over my head. I'll tell you, how many people have ridden in DC-9s or C-9s or MD-80s? Okay, we've got lots of them. We got overwing exit, and we got exit in the front here, and there's a air stairs here, but that's not really functional if the gear is sheared or if the hydraulic system's out. But there's another exit in the back of this type aircraft. What is it called? All the way in the back of a DC-9, C-9, or MD-80. Tail cone. How many people say tail cone? How many? Let's see. Well, that's a lot because usually nobody's read it at all. So if you're sitting in the back and the people are going out the herd instinct, they'll go out the way they came in, and you're sitting back here. If you've read the instructions, you go back here and open this door, and you pull that pin, that cord there, and it knocks off 16 pins. The tail cone falls off, and the air slide deploys, and you're home free. Now, whose fault it is that you haven't read that? Well, it's a little bit your own, a little bit the marketing people who don't tell you what the consequences are and don't show you what to do to minimize your chance of injury. 200 times as safe per passenger mile to ride in that airliner as it is to ride in an automobile. And so why not improve your odds? This fellow here, a photographer, sitting in the taking pictures of a simulated pickup of a downed pilot. They gave an extra pin in his belt, and a gunner's belt was supposed to be taken out of the system, but somehow it was still in there, and they didn't show him how to release the thing. And when he came over, this guy threw a blade flap on a steep pull-up and crumped in the water right in front of me while I was taking these pictures. And they all came up, except the fellow did a pin in there, and he's fighting away with that pin, and they go down, and they couldn't get him out of there. And finally, the pararescue man took a knife, stuck it in his belt, threw his wallet on the deck, put a face mask on, dove off the boat, and he cut the guy loose, and here he is purple. He's clinically dead. He's giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. This fellow's pounding his heart, and this guy's giving him flotation, and there's CPR saving a guy's life. How many people have taken CPR? Oh, that's real good. And here's College coming back, heartbeat stabilized, and still got his camera on here. And they carted him off to work, or up to the hospital, and he's back at work again in a couple of days, thanks to the fantastic work of these rescue guys. But that didn't have to happen if the guy himself had said, what am I going to do if I get hung up in that airplane? How am I going to get out of there? Just like this fellow said, he heard my pitch, and when his inertia reel failed in his helicopter, if he'd had his visor up, he would have slammed his dark glasses into his eyes, would have blinded for life, probably killed, knocked out. But he had the visor down, got a dent in the visor, not in his head, and he got bounced off the side of the chopper and got a hole in his helmet, but not in his head. And he flung the door open, and he was out of that aircraft in less than the 4 seconds he practiced with his crew. And I said, oh, you can't get out of there in 4 seconds. So I clocked him. Burns, he didn't get his whole crew out of there in 4 seconds. I ride these things a lot, so I said, I'll get in the jump seat. And the escort officer clocked me with the crew. So he said, go. And I'm fumbling with my helmet cord, and all my gear is all hung around me. And these guys coming out on top of me, they pretty near trampled me to death. But the next time when I'd actually practiced that thing, got it down cold, slowly until I had it right, and they said, go, I was first out of that machine. Because I do not believe in that Navy theory of the senior officer is the last man to leave the ship. I believe in the Army theory of follow me, men. We're going out of this right now. So you can get out of any kind of a non-pressurized helicopter or general aviation aircraft. You can punch your way out of the plexiglass if it's non-pressurized. If it's pressurized, then you're going to need an axe or a canopy braking tool to get out of it. But don't do what this fellow forgot. This guy forgot the rotor was still going around at night after he survived the crash, and here's his head where it got lopped off by the rotor. And here's 60 whirling meat cleavers of our Delaware Air Guard C-130s, and we try and shut those things down or escort passengers away from them. I will not even walk in the path of a prop blade, even if it's sitting on a prop stand with no engine on it. And you just got to avoid letting anybody loose around those props like this fellow in another outfit said, "Good night, fellas. Thanks for the ride." It was raining like heck. He jumped out of the airplane, headed for the hangar, ran right into the prop, and sunk it right in the top of his head. The impact you can withstand, properly restrained, is amazing. This guy got vertigo on takeoff in a 105 and impacted at 420 knots, as confirmed by 3 separate instruments, where the needles were embedded in the dials, and he survived sitting in that seat, went back on flying status again. While this fella that shooting coyotes in the desert made a low, slow, stalled-out turn and went in at maybe 50 miles an hour with no shoulder harness, and that's what his face looked like in the morgue. And that's a pretty ghastly-looking picture, too. And if you're sitting there looking at that instrument light and you hit the ground, it'll make a lasting impression in your head. And that's a pretty ghastly-looking picture, too. And I don't like to look at that any more than you do, but if that's the best instructor we have, and that's the best student we have, and he learns everything there is to learn, and yet he hits the ground through circumstances beyond his control, and I can shock him into wearing that shoulder harness by looking at that picture. I submit that it's well worth it. But I've been criticized for giving this thing from a standpoint that it might inject in people fear of flying, and that makes no sense to me at all, because of all the thousands of hours that airplane had flown. If it had quit a few seconds sooner, it could have stopped on the runway. A few seconds later, could have had enough altitude to eject. If we'd had the rocket seat, you can eject anywhere with that thing except in the hangar. That's a little hard on your head. But if I'd have held my head forward on impact, if I'd had a proper fitting helmet, of course, it wouldn't have come off. But if I'd held my head forward, then that helmet wouldn't have rotated off, and I wouldn't have come back here and hit my bare head on this headrest. And since it's padded now, that's never going to happen again. But if I hadn't been knocked out, I could have held my breath and run through that fire, no sweat at all. If I'd had that Nomex on or a jacket, it would have minimized my burns. So I don't think anything like that's going to happen to me again, and I hope nothing like this ever happens to you. And the only thing that really scares me about flying is the drive to the airport. Thank you.